Good afternoon. My name is Fritz Byam, and I'm the CEO of ITS Partners. To hear a discussion around the CMDB, asset management, and SecOps. I'll tell you, we don't have all the perfect answers, and sometimes there is no perfect answer for some of these things. But it's great to have a debate. If you want to challenge something, I say, or someone on the panel says, hey, that's great. That's how we all learn from one another. A lot of times when we do this live, we also have a demo that we do. We're not doing that as a part of this, but if you're interested in this demo, we have lots of follow-up at the end of this. I'm Fritz. I think I've introduced myself 10 times now. I have a couple co-presenters that I'm really excited to have with me today. And the reason I'm excited to have them is because they're real practitioners. They're people that are out there working with customers every day that are seeing the real problems and challenges that we have around this area of the business. So first is Jeff Tomsek. He's a business process consultant, and he's focused really on, and most of his experience, even though it goes across several things, most of it is around the CMDB. We also have Josh Brown, who is a consulting architect, and I call him a pyramid builder. I don't know why, but he is one of those people that understands the platform. He's done so much work in the security space. We're pretty proud of the fact that we're the global leading partner for SecOps in 2019. And you know what? Josh has been involved in most of those deals. He's been the boots on the ground, making SecOps happen for our customers. So we also have an agenda today. We're going to talk a little bit about ITS. We're going to talk a little bit about some key points and use cases. That's kind of the need of the presentation. And then next steps. I'll tell you, I'll give a little more introduction. We're seeing about 90% of our customers that are continuing to work on their ServiceNow programs. About a year ago, we transitioned to a service model that could be fully delivered in a remote state. And I mean everything. From our initial assessment, we're assessment-led methodology. That's a big part of who we are. Our technical consulting, our engagement management, right on through to our kind of after the cake support programs. We did it mostly so our team could live one of our core values of life and work in balance. We could keep consultants off the road. And at this, I'm really thankful in all of this that we did that. Of course, we're seeing some disruption, right? But I'm spreading the narrative that there's no better time than now to work on ServiceNow maturity because it allows for remote productivity and it's just plain important. So look, that brings us to our topic for the day, a combination of the CMDB, asset management, and SecOps. And I'm going to start with a joke. So the joke is like this. 3 IT people walk into a bar. One, she's a vulnerability manager, one is an asset manager, and one is a CMDB analyst. You get it? So first of all, none of those roles have time to go to a bar or even have time to go to lunch. These are roles and these are workloads where people are absolutely smoked, overloaded with work, don't even sometimes have time to talk to each other, right? So that's one thing that I think that's a theme that you're going to see throughout this presentation. And I think it's a theme you're going to see if you work with ITS. We understand those workloads. We understand what people in the field in IT are going through. And that's the point of this. That's the point of this discussion, to try to give people the ability to have some of that time back. So the specific things we're going to talk about today are key points and use cases. So let's take a look at those. So key points. Trusted CMDB is so foundational. I mean, it's foundational to everything ServiceNow. Now, we do lots of webinars based solely on the CMDB, and this isn't one of them. So this kind of assumes some CMDB knowledge, but we do a lot of this work. Another key point, matching records is so critical to making all this work right. One part that I harp on, because I'm not the most technical person, that IT, security, and others have got to be aligned in how they approach, build, and maintain the CMDB. If we can't get aligned and on the same page, how can we get others, even especially executives, to get on board? But if we can be, we can build an airtight business case, because this is a good investment. The other thing is, and I alluded to it early, the best answer there's not one best answer for everybody. I mean, let's face it, that's why this is a discussion. The best answer is likely debate based on your current level of maturity or where you want to get to and the uniqueness of your organization. Use cases that will hopefully point out some of those features. Risk scoring, we're going to have some discussion around that because there's lots of varied opinions on that. Operationalizing vulnerability response through the CMDB seems like a pretty easy thing, but I think there's some things to think about there. And then finally, doing something a little bit innovative and leveraging the CMDB, SAMP, and VR for software exposure assessment. Another way we like to characterize that is off-cycle vulnerability scanning. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Jeff, and he's going to talk a little bit about who ITS is. And just as soon as he's done, we'll get into those key points and use cases. Take it away, Jeff.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that intro. Really appreciate it. So ITS is a company full of really fun, interesting people. And amongst us, we're all scattered people who've actually lived in your shoes. We know what the status quo feels like. We've been there. It's actually fun to hear about people's prior experiences before they got here. But really what it comes down to is we want to get our hands dirty with you. We want to make sure that we achieve all of the outcomes. We are an outcome-based driven company, and frankly, we need to be. We have a 9.6 CSAT score because we want to give an unmatched customer experience. This is a score that's given from our customers to kind of validate how much we care and how good we want to be, and we want to continue to strive to be even better. As that betterment happens, one of the things that we have done is actually become an elite level partner. Here you can see on this slide that the platform is very robust, as we all know. Even though we have all of these offerings, our leadership here at ITS has decided in the application. We don't want to be a jack of all trades. We want to make sure that we're the best of the best at these particular applications. And I think that we do a very good job of doing that. I want to point out quickly that if you look in the bottom left-hand corner here, you have the CMDB. I want to point this out because you can see that it's foundational to actually reaching the maturity needed to escalate into these other applications.
Thanks, Jeff. So look, we're going to transition into some of the key points. And the first one that we're going to talk about is a trusted CMDB as the foundation for all the things we're going to talk about. And so on the next slide, we're going to talk about how do you build a security-ready CMDB? And I think I've alluded to it in the past, but one of the things is alignment. And it's sometimes alignment in this is almost more important than what we do, but we have to get alignment of all parties on what's really important to the business. I hate to say this, but those people that were kind of the butt of the joke, the IT people, the joke resonates with me because they don't have time to go out. In some organizations, it's not all, a lot of those people don't go out. They don't talk to each other. So that level of a communication and alignment on what really matters is one of the key elements. And really, the way that you ensure that and do that in a programmatic way is set up strong CMDB governance. And really, it's all about being in alignment and being intentional about what you add to the CMDB and considering the big picture, because a lot of times you're acting in another department or another person's interest and act in alignment with the governance. So that's kind of my high level part about it. And Jeff's going to talk a little bit more about some of the technical aspects of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Fritz. As everyone knows, or I hope that we would know, the CMDB is the central source of truth. What does that actually mean? That's where we're going to actually use a foundation of our data to get further along and mature across the platform. As we mature, we can do things like bring in integrations so that we're not having end user experience that isn't ideal. I don't want to go to several different browsers, several different tools to do my job every day, right? This is where the platform can be utilized as a single space to bring in all of the data from all of our separate tools to enhance awareness for our risk and compliance across our organization, as well as, again, increase that end user experience. One of the things that we can utilize to make sure that we have better data and that our processes and governance are in place is this CMDB Health Dashboard. I'm not sure if everyone in here is actually utilizing this right now, but it's important to know that when we go into a lot of customers, the ones that aren't aware of it, this is free. You actually get this with the platform when you purchase it. All you have to do to turn this on is in that tab, the CMDB Health Dashboard Jobs, there are several sliders. You just turn them on, and it's a scheduled job that runs daily. Let's talk about some of the benefits of this. If you have a CMDB owner, then you can utilize the three pieces that make up this dashboard: completeness, compliance, and correctness, to send out tasks to your subject matter experts who should know their data for their classes because they've been identified and should be able to do so based on the governance we set in place to rectify any of the issues or reconcile them. So quickly, completeness is made up of recommendation and required fields. These are fields that are going to be on our forms for each of these tables. The recommended field, we would ideally want to be able to require on every single table. However, we may not be able to, so we leave it just as recommended. Required is anything that's on a form that we absolutely need to have in as a value to be able to save that form. For those of you who have ServiceNow now, you would have a red asterisk next to these fields. 9 times out of 10, when we see issues with this field, it's because somebody didn't import incorrectly, or maybe we are having an issue with a scheduled job. Compliance is an interesting one. Compliance is compliance against the system. For those of you who are looking to upgrade soon, there's going to be Hardware Asset Management Pro, which is going to be a really cool feature where we can do some interesting things with this compliance field. But you would utilize things like last run date to utilize this part of the scorecard. Lastly, the correctness is made up of duplicates, orphans, and staleness. Duplicates are exactly what you think they are. There are unique records that have a duplicate, so we can identify those. We would send out a task that's coming from the owner to the subject matter expert based on key performance indicating fields, as in assigned to or assignment group or support group, to help identify those. Orphan is talking about CIs, which are configuration items across the platform that don't have a healthy relationship or are expecting to have relationships and they're not there. So we can send out a task for those to those subject matter experts as well. Lastly, staleness. Staleness is something, a CI that has not checked in a set period of time. That set period of time is set to 60 days out of the box. Some of you may have this turned on. I quickly want to talk about advancing into a more mature state with this. If you guys know what the CI class manager is, we can begin to configure this by going into the class manager, looking at that hierarchy, seeing what the relationships are between the tables within the system, and going in and actually setting criteria for each of these pieces of the scorecard so that we can have the most mature system possible with the best data, get our staleness tasks taken care of quicker, and have less duplicates, orphans, things of that nature. All of this will help with anything across the platform.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. This is Fritz. So one of the things we talk about is how sometimes, you know, a CMDB is a pretty regimented buildup, but Josh Brown, is there some different decisions you might make that are things based on your current level of maturity relative to the CMDB?
Certainly. It's a lot of degrees of how the CMDB is going to relate to that data. And I'm going to think about this from the maturity level of both the SecOps side and the CMDB. As the CMDB matures in its maturity, it gives
it really is. I mean, this is looking at, you know, one of the questions we were posing and the things we were discussing last night is there's several fields that are kind of similar to business criticality. And the question is where should that level reside? Should it reside at the CI level, or should you actually be setting up in VR where a queries the appropriate CI relationship? And the answer is really it depends. Of course, we'd all like to be in a mature position where we're, querying a appropriate CI relationship. But for some organizations where that's just not possible, or they haven't reached that level of maturity, maybe it's appropriate to have it on. Some customers, we've done a lot of CMDB work. This is an example. The other thing you'll see there aren't logos on these slides. This is a pretty public forum. And although a lot of these stories that we have, like we talk with knowledge at the customer or something, we're trying to be pretty careful about protecting our customers and what they're doing. And if it gets to it where you want to talk about logos or references, of course we have those as well. But this was a big organization where we've gone in and we've done CMDB cleanup and SAM Pro. That's a pretty common program for us. And their CMDB health score obviously increased significantly. Actually, and on the next slide shows that from there, they matured to using the success they've had with the CMDB and SAM Pro to really mature their security incident response and vulnerability response programs. So pretty common where a customer comes in, does the CMDB, wants to do SAMP, and then they take that and they leverage it. And usually there's a great business case for incremental investment to do it and move that forward. So one of the key points through this whole thing, and one of the challenges is really matching records. And as the next slide says, if we can't match the vulnerability scanner records to the CMDB, nothing's really going to work that great. So between Jeff and Josh, let's talk a little bit about what makes matching work well. And then after that, we're going to talk about some of the challenges with getting all that set up correctly. So
Jeff, what are the things that we would do like in the CMDB to make that work well, that would make our health dashboard better?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Josh. So at this point, what we'd want to do is make sure that we have those key performance indicators set in place. And that's where something like those required fields can also help us. But any key performance indicator is going to be something that is potentially particular to your organization. I know that when we started spitballing stuff like this around, one of the things we talked about is if you're a healthcare network, maybe acknowledging that something is HIPAA or something could help, but having clear defined service mapping and dependencies, things like that can help. But the key performance indicator fields usually reside within assigned to, assignment group, support group. We can even use for grouping department, location, things of that nature. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Josh?
No, I think those are like a lot of the good ones. Sensitive data and business criticality are things that we will talk about probably a little more too as we move on. As we were kind of talking about, there's some things that we wanted to figure out is with the record matching. And it's a thing where you've populated your CMDB and now we have the scanner and the scanner's like data, and it's set up to have that dependency information come in. And as that comes in, it looks, and we have to decide if we're going to match that fully correctly and how that matches to what we have in the CMDB. And so when we talk about vulnerability management scanner, we're talking about something that has a asset and then how it matches to that CI inside of the CMDB. The one thing that we typically run into a lot with this is whether or not like it's going to be the same setup for each customer and how much of a percentage we can make that matching happen. So that matching happens based on what we have for that CMDB data and then how it comes in from the vulnerability scanner and whether or not it is coming in as an authenticated scan from the scanner or an unauthenticated scan, which may not bring as much information in it. So the next step when we do this, where we come into this, is we try to determine where our position is once those scans information starts to populate into the CMDB. And it's going to have to be then making decisions on, do we have the correct amount of information with integrations into the CMDB? Do we need to take something like ServiceNow Discovery and go look out and do more scanning across a wide variety of IPs that we may not have been doing before. You know, for instance, a customer we had may have had a Linux servers come in from the scanner that weren't putting in the CMDB yet, so we had to go and expand discovery to get those. You may not be having your Macs, and your Macs could be coming in from the scanners, so you need to do something like integrate with Jamf. Those are all pieces that are different things we may have to be added into there. And that's all pieces that have as that part, as we can do that matching and make those available from both, making it so both asset management and the security side are having and looking at the same CI or asset information. So as those information's coming in from the scanner, we start to assign to specific classes and put them in the correct classes. Now, if that isn't coming into the particular classes it'll come into, it comes into an empty class. And the biggest thing with this then becomes creating a process to say, okay, if they're not in the class, how should they be managed? Now, there will be a percentage of ones in which you choose just not to manage. Those are a lot of those things as that comes into there that we just, you know, we're not going to manage because those aren't ones that we need to worry about. It may be a transient device, like somebody's mobile that gets scanned, depending on how your scanner goes. And then we may also have some of those that are devices that we just don't worry about and don't want in the CMDB. And those are going to be things that come in from VR, but that don't match in the CI world. So a lot of the scanners integrations are moving to using the IRE model. Some have already done it and some will move it. And that will be beneficial because it's the standard from ServiceNow is to go when we're matching information in the CMDB and reconciling it into that CMDB using that engine.
All right. Hey, thanks, Josh. And then we have a, you know, maybe Josh too, you could speak to we've had some customer success with matching scanner records in the CMDB.
Yeah, so if we come into the customer and they have a very mature, very controlled, very trusted CMDB, and those are all the terms that we're trying to get to, both with the health dashboard and other pieces, we can get to a high level of match coming from the vulnerability scanner. That lessens our risk on not knowing what something is when it's coming in. And this is an example of a customer who, as expectations set, and because their knowledge of their CMDB, we worked with them to increase the lookup rules and the matching rules that have as the vulnerability scanner information comes in, and to be able to put the CMDB up to a 90% match as we were coming in.
That's great. Hey, thanks, Josh. All right. Hey, let's take a look at our next, actually our first use case. And this one, I think this is a great one for, you know, I wish this was a discussion where we could really, you know, talk about this. And I'll tell you why this was exciting for me is, as I was really trying to understand some of these things, I talked to one of our senior technical people last night, Josh Burnson, if any of you have met him. And, you know, he almost came through the phone on this one. And I was just vigorously writing notes. And his message was this, and too many customers build a crazy model. They write a 30-page manual to cover all bases and all eventualities, and they're really kind of forced into it. But he's saying even the best security people don't have the data to make good decisions for the most part. And the data could be the vulnerability, has it been exploited? Does the patch even work? And he's just passionate about getting vulnerability managers focused on things that really matter. I mean, and this is a little tongue in cheek, right? You know, Josh was like, almost everyone's doing it, or at least the hard way. These crazy complex plans that we know about the people at the butt of the joke. They don't have time to follow up on all the plans. So again, we're kind of coming back to that theme in this whole thing is, you know, the answer really depends on where you are in your maturity journey and the unique needs of your organizations. Things that you have to get alignment in the organization on, get assessed in the organization on, and come out with a single plan to move forward on. So on the next slide, you know, in talking to Josh, he Brown will go into a little bit more on these things, but in working with customers, and some of these aren't even really completely ServiceNow related, right? But there's kind of three things we're seeing out there that people are doing it right. There's three bases that those people have covered, right? First, there's a scanner. It has basic. It's necessary and it's critical. And you know, if you're starting there, that's probably okay. The next thing is this idea of KPs or information or nuance about your organization. You know, things like, is a server exposed to the internet or isn't it? You know, and that is where ServiceNow really shines, about bringing that context from the CMDB, from some of the ITOM workload into the whole discussion around vulnerability management and ultimately response. And then the third part, we'll talk a little bit, and it's very closely related to ServiceNow and very closely related to CMDB. And if it's not today, it's going to be in the future. It's this idea that you really need an expert data source to help you with risk scoring, because there's all sorts of stuff beyond the walls that you're not seeing, you know, in your CMDB or with your scanner. So Josh, you have a lot of experience here. Can you take us through some of the discussions? And again, I wish we could have an exchange and we could argue about some of this stuff with customers, because honestly, you know, these customer stories, we learn a lot from customers, you know, as much as it's a very symbiotic relationship. So Josh, if you could just walk us through, like, how does this work at different levels of maturity? I think that'd be useful.
Okay. And I think I always feel like I'm gonna make somebody not happy if we don't at least mention that one piece of this, where the tightest of the security person is going to say it doesn't matter what the risk is, everything's at risk if there's anything on it. And we understand that, but we also understand the perspective of there's also a degree in which keeping the business running is something we have to consider when we're thinking about the risk or where our sensitive data sits. So the first, and this is kind of stinging the start, is also in that the crawl, walk, fly sort of mentality, is that we start off with what the risk is coming from the vulnerability scanners, and all the scanners are going to be doing it different. So if we're using multiple, we have to negotiate between those, and we have to then look at saying, okay, what is that saying it is? It's going to get a score from the NVD, it's going to get a bunch of different things, and how does that relate, and look at that information. But typically we're not at that next level where we're going to be able to say, okay, but how is this CI used, or how is it supportable? Is it there and able for us to be able to look at? But we do start to gain a bit of business impact information as we start to get more mature and have more information in an established CMDB, because we can look at it and say, okay, these are the business impacts, and this is the business criticality, or this is the ones that have sensitive data on it. The next step in getting to that even the most mature point, or even to that fully mature place, is that where we have that full level context of app services, where we have the CSDM fully, at least some bit set up, and we are starting to go down that path. And we start to have an idea, okay, of where the relationships are and where the business criticality starts at, where it comes down to what has sensitive data, what's going to be our, there's several ways for us to talk about it, but what is our crown jewel services? What are the services that are making us the most money? Which is going to lose the money if it goes down, or if it's not available, or if we lose data off it? Those are the things that start to give us the ability to use that to say, okay, what is the risk score? So we often then are asked this last question as to what is the value of the third-party sources. And when we're talking about third-party sources, the scanners are considered a third-party source, but we're talking the next level of those, like something like Recorded Futures, or Shodan, or any of those pieces in there that allow us to see what it's happening out in the real world. It allows us to answer questions as to, is it exploitable? Is the patch available? Is the patch working? But this also gets into some of those go out even further to extended things to where, do we have something that is being notable on Twitter? Is it a 0-day? If I would think that if I had to go and spend my entire day trying to figure out what things were coming up and being big on Twitter, that I'd probably spend my entire life on that and not following that, what we try to do with our life and work balance. So that's what the idea of what we're trying to think about when we say, okay, what's the next step in this, and what's the maturity of gaining and adding a third party, that third party source.
That's great, Josh. Thank you. The second use case is operationalizing vulnerability response. You could make the argument for security incident response as well, but really taking this information and taking action. And if you look at the next slide, it's kind of, you know, and me in my chair where I'm not doing this every day, this looks pretty easy, right? Or, you know, we group a bunch of stuff together, we assign it, and we go and get it fixed. And we know that some of it can be automated and some of it can't. But in talking with the practitioners like Josh, we find out this isn't quite as easy as it looks. And actually, a lot of the work in implementing VR is around this particular point. So Josh, what have we learned, or what have you learned to tell people like me who think this is pretty easy and linear?
Well, I think the idea of telling you that there's first some small parts that are easy. There are some pieces that are, as to when we get, especially, and I think the part I would focus on is that assignment and grouping pieces. And that's kind of on that side of, we're trying to get an assignment and we're trying to bring that down, but it's complicated and, you know, it takes a lot to figure it out. Jeff can tell me what CIs and what assignments those are and what classes have who should have assignments and what CIs should have assignments on those, if we're talking an infrastructure-based look at it. What really causes a complication is when we start to talk about, okay, how do I patch for this Apache vulnerability or the Java vulnerability? Who gets assigned to that? Is it the application or is it the infrastructure? And we're trying to look at those and say, who should be the one that does this? And that's where that complexity comes down. Now, we could decide to just give it fully to infrastructure and then hand to application, but most people don't want to put that burden on that application side to just say, hold this, and then, or on the infrastructure side, and then say, do this, and then hand it off to the application people, because it's putting a more burden on them versus them taking it at that point. So those are things that complicate it, but those are things that can be done and are able to do automation through the tool and to be able to like clarify and bring it and integrate groupings for that. In that piece of remediation and automation, a couple of things we have to think about is, are we going to use change management in this? Now, some people are going to think, and especially, I mean, even on the CMDB side, the change management is the default response within how to remediate infrastructure and pieces on those. Now, the other side of this is that there are people who do application patching. There are people who do want to fit direct bugs in applications. So you are going to have something like project management and Scrum Agile from ServiceNow being used by those teams and not using change management, and the other teams that are going to be using change management. Vulnerability response has change management abilities in it and has direct outputs to those. And sometimes we have to go a step further and be able to integrate with those other pieces if that's not how that task is being pushed out to be completed by the remediation teams. One of the big things on this, and one of the things we see with a lot of the customers is, as they do this, getting to that single pane of glass and giving it a way for us to cause communication to be created between everyone. You know, the joke at the beginning about all these people not having time to do stuff is also the joke about whether or not they're communicating, or if I'm just handing you something that says, go fix this vulnerability. And that's that communication and assignment are things that have to happen hand in hand.
Let's go. Yes, I'm happy to talk about case 3. You know, because I kind of see this as moving from maybe moving from some of those things that are just consuming the platform and doing the things that optimize business as usual. This feels innovative to me. And again, that can be a debate. Maybe a vulnerability manager would say, oh, this is just one more thing to do, Fritz. But let's go to the next slide and look at a scenario. So we have a published and exploited vulnerability. And we've just finished our, I don't know, you fill in the blank, weekly, every 2 weeks, daily on things, a monthly scan on a resource constrained server. So someone wants to know, how vulnerable are we? I mean, the vulnerability manager probably wants to know how vulnerable we are. So what are your options? Well, and we've seen a lot of customers try to run off-cycle scans. And I'll tell you, even if you had the time to run an off-cycle scan, you know, your scanner is a lot of complexity. I mean, it's great at deploying agents and gathering a ton of data, but there's a ton of lift with doing that. There's also potentially, you know, degradation of performance on the servers that you're scanning. And even if you had time, that probably the report you get back, you're going to have to spend another couple hours pouring through it and parsing it and trying to figure out what it's really telling you relative to your risk on that vulnerability. So I'm here today to say there's a better way, and that's explained on the next slide. So ServiceNow calls it software exposure using SAMP, and this ties everything we're talking about. It ties together the CMDB, the SAMP database, and vulnerability response. And I'll have Josh explain this, but it's really not that complex. It's really using what you have in place with ServiceNow as an imperfect out-of-cycle scanner to make a reasonable decision about risk. And Josh, I'll turn it over to you.
So yeah, we're thinking about this and talking about this in the case of like outside of the normal system, right? So we have a normal system of vulnerability scanner and NVD reporting in when vulnerabilities happen and then making us aware of those and we start to be actionable on those. Sometimes we have the 0 day, what might be called a 0 day, where it hits the news that says this software has a vulnerability that's been found. Somebody recently had this happen to them. And what then needs to happen and what people then are trying to find out. And then sometimes the people we're talking about is all the way up to the board of directors is how vulnerable is our organization for this particular software. And the ability for us to say, this software is here, we've normalized it to this point, we know exactly what version we have everywhere, we know what versions are on these, and we know which one is vulnerable, and then we can go from there to go to the next step of saying, okay, now we can get our fully remediation worked out for this particular piece of software because it's hit the news and now we're really concerned about it.
Yeah, and that can be done in literally in minutes. In minutes you can write the query and have your report back. It takes 5 or 10 minutes to run.
Hey, Fritz, I want to quickly, this is Jeff, I want to quickly interject and say that ServiceNow is also the only tool that has the maturity within the CMP tool to also utilize VR the way that it does. I think it's important to point that out.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Hey, guys, we are getting near the end of our deck here. And I just want to talk a little bit, kind of to bring things home with the next slide, about, did I mention we can do everything in our whole life cycle remotely? And it's really important right now. And just like you guys are trying to stay productive, we're trying to keep our organization productive. I'm a huge advocate of the workshop-led methodology because it leads to clarity and alignment, right? And we paint a finish line together, paint a minimum viable together, then we go build it. So I'm not going to go through our whole how we get good outcomes and that thing. I will just say, and the next slide kind of shows, again, we've had a lot of success in a heavy lift with some pretty important industries, around financial and health are two really big ones for us. But retail and energy are right there behind them. And I think it's all in our approach, and kind of like today where we know our best practices. We're good at this, right? We're not great at everything on ServiceNow, but these workloads, optimizing business as usual, nailing the CMDB and getting the benefit of it, writing the business case, making the incremental business case, we're really good at that. And that helps us get a lot of the outcomes that we need to be successful. So I hope you got a sense for that today. I hope you got a sense that ITS is really an organization. ServiceNow is purpose-driven. We make work better for people. ITS's purpose is freeing IT, which is really a subset of that. We have a company of 100 people. 95% of them are IT people. We believe that IT people are the smartest people in the organization. We also believe that a lot of them are doing thankless, mundane jobs in an environment in which they can be successful, and that's not acceptable to us. So I hope that comes through. We're really here to try to help IT, try to help put things together to move what we think is an incredible investment, incredible business case around service forward. Truly believe in the workloads. We believe they're integrated. If the CMDB is not right, we'll tell anybody. That needs to change if you really want to make the kind of progress that you need to pay for this wonderful investment. So look, I'll get off my soapbox. I'll say thank you so much for being here today. Anything we can do to help you in this time, insights conversations. You want to sit down and talk to somebody who's been through probably what you're looking at for an hour about a specific use case or a specific problem you have. Give us a call. We'll do that. Workshops are not that expensive given the value that they have, and they can really lead to some wonderful cases around alignment. And we're doing them successfully in some huge companies remotely today. If you want a demo, reach out. Happy to show off what ITS can do, what our customers can do, and most importantly, what the people inside ITS can do to help you free IT in your organization. Thank you so much for joining today.